podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hi, this is Ben, Sam and Harry from the Late Breaking F1 podcast, and you can follow this year's Formula One season with us on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
We're here every single week to bring you race previews, reviews and our opinions on everything from the F1 world, with plenty of fun along the way.
Listen to the Late Breaking F1 podcast now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Serie Chronicles is a Bianconeri Chronicles production.
Hello and welcome to the Serie Chronicles podcast. I'm back and I'm Mina Rizuki. Apologies for being absent last week, but as always, I am joined by my brilliant co-hosts, Patrick Kendrick and Nicky Bandini. Hello guys, how are you today?
Doing good. Just preparing for the chaos of another European week. It feels like nowadays, we can say it since last season, that there's Italian clubs progressing nicely into these knockout stages, these tournaments. Every time we get to a midweek in February, March, April, it feels like it gets super busy for us. But that's a good problems to have.
Culture is not just back; it's re-established. I don't know about you. You've already looking ahead to European action. I've only just got over the previous weekend of Serie A. We delivered the Serie A highlights show earlier on today, so. I've been watching back clips from this weekend. There are lots of good goals, but I'm sure we're going to get into all of that.
What was your favourite game, Patrick, of this weekend?
My favourite game of the weekend was Napoli-Juventus. I mean, that probably would have been the case even if it was a dull, goalless snore fest, but it was actually quite exciting. So doubly so, Napoli-Juventus.
Well, I wish that was my favourite game.
Know your audience. Apologies, Mina. That was mean of me, wasn't it?
I mean, there was a part of me that was crying into my ice cream as I was watching Dusan Vlahovic do his best impression of Lukaku. But other than that, I do this mainly because it upsets you, Nikki, and I don't know why.
Lukaku managed what Vlahovic didn't this weekend, so there you go. He actually did score.
Absolutely. So. Roma are on fire at the moment. I sort of want to be a Roma fan at the moment because it just must be so great. Simon for once is actually smiling. You know, the poor guy has been so miserable watching them try to score goals. And now actually no team has scored more goals in their last 7 matches under De Rossi. Although Inter have scored just as many. But that's not the game we're going to start off with. We are going to start off with what is a game mostly known by the poor refereeing. Although some people disagree. Some people don't think this was such poor refereeing. I think the suspension of the actual referee, Dybala, should tell you that this wasn't a perfect match. But of course, I am talking about Lazio hosting Milan on Friday night, in which Milan managed to score a goal on the 88th minute to make it 1-0. I think it's very difficult to watch this game and not feel a little bit sorry for Lazio. Not just because of the red card, but mostly because actually I think that they were pretty good, to be honest with you. Actually, I really enjoyed watching Lazio. I didn't think of them as being this terrible side that deserved to be losing, perhaps in the same way that I thought about them against Fiorentina. So was this poor officiating, or do you guys agree with our producer Simon, who thinks it was bang on, they deserved the 3 red cards?
I like how we just gently re-established producer Simon's Roma sporting credentials before asking the question in the game when Lazio had 3 players sent off. I don't know. I think I might be at odds with people here. The Pellegrini red card is one situation, and obviously that all relates to a non-stoppage in play. Christian Pulisic trying to play on. I think Pulisic is within his right to play on to the whistle. I understand that we can get into squabbles about sportsmanship and what he did or didn't know about the play behind them. But at the end, if it's a head injury, it is the referee's responsibility to stop the play, not the players. So I think he's within his rights, and I think that Pellegrini needs to keep his cool a bit better there. The 2 red cards after that are harder to judge. Maricic, we have no idea what he said. And in the end, Maricic, if he said something awful, then that's a red card offence. And Italian referees are quite stringent on back chat in general. I think if you compare them to Premier League referees, they do put up with much less. And we've seen everything from sarcastic claps getting a straight red card before now. So
Yes,
don't talk back is good advice. But the Guendouzi one is the one that I think is the most borderline, because he's being tugged and he's just retaliating a little bit. But I think other than that, the first two,
and he's an Arsenal legend, Nicky, lest we forget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the other two, I'm maybe not as outraged. But I think the overall handling of the game was awful, and it was completely sort of one of those feelings of you've shown your cards too much and now you've lost control. But I think the big decisions, I don't know if I'm as outraged as some people are.
We want you to head over to serieachronicles.com/Patreon now and subscribe to the Chronicles Tifosi membership with a free 7-day trial. Get priority access to every episode and voice note before the rest of the world. Plus, no ads and bonus Patreon-only exclusive episodes and video episodes. Also, be sure to join the new chat community in the Patreon app and chat with fellow subscribers.
I just feel like when it came to Guendouzi and Pulisic actually ended up being sort of the star of the show. He only had to sort of deflect some of the questions that were asked of him in the post-match conference as to whether or not Pulisic was portraying unsportsmanlike behaviour. Did he do anything wrong? Aren't you supposed to play to the whistle? Or do you think he understood what Pellegrini was doing and just went for it anyway because it's also his right and thought, what's going to happen? But between Guendouzi, was Pulisic in the eye of the storm, not knowing, blissfully ignorant of everything that was happening, or quite cunning in how he managed it?
Cunning has quite negative connotations, doesn't it? I think it's sort of, the idea that you're being snide. I think he did a good job in dribbling away from Luca Pellegrini, and then that's a clear second yellow card. That's really naive defending. And as Nicky said, you can't decide that your teammate has a head injury, so you're going to stop playing. If you're really concerned, just kick the ball into touch. He's a yard away from the touchline. So that would have been very simple to resolve, and that would have kept it 11 against 11. The Marušić one, we don't know whether he, often actually it's bizarre. Marušić has been in the league for many years now, but often you can actually fall more foul of the officials if you swear in your native tongue because they don't know what you're saying and they just interpret. A bit like Jude Bellingham, I think he said, "It's a goal for F's sake," and then.
I love the accent.
Well, if you've got it, flaunt it.
Do you remember in Serie A as well? Ademola Lookman got booked for pointing the look man gesture because they thought that was something like.
Yes, that's so true.
I like that. So we don't know what Marušić said. As for the other one, I mean, it's rare, isn't it, that you see a player who's involved in two separate sending off offences, one for being fouled and the other for doing the fouling. I can understand why Guendouzi was annoyed, because when someone is persistently hacking at you or pulling your shirt as he was there, and Lazio already losing the game, they're chasing the game, they're already a couple of players down. I can understand why he then lashes out and tries to push a Pulisic. To me, that should have been a yellow card for each player. But I think credit to Pulisic. I never thought we'd be comparing him to Armando Izzo, but some opponents just get under your skin. And the way we saw Izzo got Di Maria sent off last season and Luka Jovic this season, whether it was Pulisic's intention to get Guendouzi sent off, I don't think so. With Pellegrini, certainly would have been, but that's part of the game. When you know your opponent is on a yellow card, we saw that with Kvaratskhelia against Cambiaso this weekend. When a player is booked and you're going up against them, you tend to take them on more frequently because you think, well, if I go past them, they either have to avoid making a challenge, in which case I get away from them, or if they do make a tackle and they get it wrong, they could be sent off. So I don't have a problem with Pulisic's conduct whatsoever.
Did you think that Castellanos deserved a penalty after Manian's foul earlier on? Or do you agree with the referee when he waved play on?
I don't know what a penalty is and isn't anymore, I'm afraid. No,
honestly, neither do I.
I feel like, and it's quite a bit of it's quite difficult. It's becoming quite difficult now. This is a slightly self-indulgent professional moment. But as a commentator, there's rarely a game goes by in Serie A where there's not a penalty to commentate on. And you don't even know how to frame it anymore, how to set it up, because you just end up repeating the same thing over and over again. You can't express surprise because it's a player who's shooting unopposed from 12 yards away, and there's a goalkeeper and the penalty taker is the favourite. So it's not like you can say, Bandini! It just doesn't work. Like, sorry for your ears there. I realise that I have rendered you deaf in the past with me shouting unexpectedly. But, so then you have to do it another way. You have to say, Rizuki to give Serie A Chronicles the lead. I don't know why this has become a commentary tutorial. I apologise. What I'm saying is there are too many penalties, and I'm sick of penalties because they're no longer a rare currency in the game, and it's no longer exciting. It used to be exciting. I remember we used to go and watch Southampton play. If you got a penalty, it was almost as much fun as a goal because there's the whole extended emotions of it. I realise this is a massive tangent from what was a yes/no question as to whether it should have been a penalty. But, there's that whole... I love the way the emotions carry on for a penalty. The first of all, there's a player going into the box, then he gets fouled, then there's that pause. Is the ref going to give it? Yes, they're going to give it. Now you have all this sort of drawn out, okay.
VAR moment.
All that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something very special about penalties, and I'm worried that they're being ruined a little bit by the frequency with which they're being awarded. So I'll let Nicky handle whether or not Castellanos should have had a penalty or not.
I don't know.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
I'm not sure I have a strong opinion on it either. I think, to go back to what Mina was talking about right at the beginning, I do think Lazio played well. And I think Lazio are having this slightly odd period where if you just look at their results, you might think they're playing awfully. And I don't think that's true. I think that they're playing not especially, thrilling football. And I think Sarri is trying to go back to basics with them. And I think he's doing some things that not many coaches are doing at the moment. I think that there's a real trend at the moment in Italy and probably really all across Europe towards the man on man all over the pitch, to embracing the one-on-ones, to playing that high tempo in your face game. And he's doing zonal defending. He's got his players working in controlling space and playing a completely different approach. And we saw it work really well in that first leg against Bayern. And I think that there are parts of it that are working really well for him every game. I think this team, unfortunately, just lacks that critical bit of extra talent, that spark that Milinkovic-Savic gave it. And we knew that was coming. And I think that Sarri has, in his typically slightly understated way, made his point that perhaps he didn't get all the players that he was hoping that the club would bring in. If I asked for player A and they give me player C or D, then I didn't get what I wanted, did I? But I actually think he's doing a good job with what he's got. Absolutely. And it was interesting to hear him talking about this afterwards. And I think so often in the past with Sarri, you've seen the European games coming up. And of course, we're recording this on Tuesday before the Bayern Munich game. And you may well be listening to it, I'm afraid, if people are listening afterwards. But
when Lazio stormed through to the quarterfinals.
But I do think that in previous seasons, we've seen him pretty much throw Europe in the bin because he's trying to concentrate on the league. I think he'd be very happy if it goes the other way this time and they can get through this round. I think his greatest thrill, his greatest interest in the season right now is that Champions League tie, and knocking Bayern Munich out really would be something.
But this is what it is. I mean, I think that you so well highlighted just the Lazio conundrum at the moment, because I would argue that I know there's Luis Alberto, I know there's Ciro Immobile, who has scored so many goals and won a Golden Boot, but I would have argued that the only world-class player that they really did have was Sergio Milinkovic-Savic. So managing to still not, I mean, their performances haven't fallen off entirely, but you could understand that they are not what they were last season. And not only did he not get the players he wanted, but so many of them arrived towards the very end of the transfer market, which left him with little time to really prepare the start of the season. So it's been sort of a little bit manic, especially for a team that is involved in so many different competitions and having to play so regularly. And it's a thin squad at that, with injuries, of course, to Immobile and to various members of the squad. So I agree with you. And then watching this match, I really did think that they they were very good. Even when they went down to 10 men, they still had plenty of opportunities in the second half to really go for it. Ciro Immobile missed a couple, but I never looked at them and thought, wow, they're going to, they're really suffering down to 10 men. I never thought that when watching them. And I thought their reaction was really impressive. So, yes, I did feel a little bit sorry for them. I just quickly want to read to you what Gazzetta said about the refereeing decision. They said, a great referee, this is about Marasic, given the climate, pretends not to hear. Not to hear the offence. The second to go Guendouzi for a reaction. If De Bello had drawn a yellow, no one would have been scandalised. And I think that's one of the few times I agree entirely with Gazzetta.
I think that's really fair. I said the opposite, didn't I? That I could go with all of them, but I think that's a really fair way of assessing it, actually.
Precisely that. And I think that if you read what they wrote about Juventus, you would never read Gazzetta again. But I won't go into that. On this occasion, I thought they did a great job. But let's talk a little bit about Milan, because they are the actual winners of this match. Okafor comes on, scores a goal. Best team in Europe when it comes to goals coming from substitutes this season. They have two players who are bench players, really, with at least 4 goals as substitutes. They are also the team that has scored the most goals from the bench. That's 13. Great squad, or it's just, Pioli's been lucky.
I think it is an excellent squad. I think that was the whole point of their recruitment drive last summer, wasn't it? They used the Tonali money plus some of their own funds to try and cover themselves a bit more extensively across the pitch. They brought in a couple of starters. Loftus-Cheek, Reinders and Pulisic have all quickly become starters, albeit Reinders is out of favour recently. Adley's been playing a lot more since the return of Benacer from injury. But I do think that they have a good squad, and they've got some quite luxury players on the bench. I know Pioli's been criticising Chukwueze, but Okafor, when he's come in, he hasn't disappointed. Jovic is similar as well. And I think that was the whole thing that we criticised Milan for last season. It was any time that they sustained an injury and they had one of their key players missing, they just weren't the same side. Whereas they're still not as good. And that goes for any team in world football. Yes, occasionally we've seen Inter rotate to good effect, but they're having a very special season. But, we've seen it with Juventus. We'll get onto them, but they were without McKennie and Rabiot, and it showed. Danilo didn't play, it only trained for one session. So I think there's a lot to be said for having a squad where if you need to change the game, especially since the advent of 5 substitutions, I think it's important to have goal-scoring options on the bench. And whilst it was a slightly fortuitous goal in the way there's a couple of ricochets in there, Okafor did what he was brought in to do in the first place. And I think that's what you need as much as anything. You're also betting almost on the hunger of the player, a player who's not been in the starting 11. They get their opportunity, and then coming off the bench, you just think, I just want that one chance. If it falls to me, I'm going to take it. And I think Okafor and Jovic have shown with their consistency off the bench that if a chance comes along, then they can certainly take it. So I think strong squad, good recruitment, and still think they're a world-class centre forward away from being a very good side.
Nicky, do you wonder about the fact that Lazio have now fumbled 16 points from leading situations? I'm trying really hard not to pay attention to producer Simon, but he's one thing he noted in the notes was they self-imploded and it was beautiful. Now, but I'm asking you this. Do you worry about the fact that it seems to be, they are fumbling a lot of the points that they gather after taking the lead? Is this something that you should worry about? Not particularly in this match, because obviously, they didn't score, but just in general, is the mentality where we need it to be for Lazio?
I guess it depends where we sort of draw a line of worry. Maybe I've written them off too soon, frankly, but I think mentally I've sort of consigned them to not making the Champions League again next season. I think when I look at the table, I see them down in there in 9th. I don't think there's much in their form that suggests they're about to make that jump when there are other teams ahead of them, like Roma, Atalanta, Bologna, all playing really well at the moment. I suppose Atalanta were actually not bad the weekend, at Napoli as well, showing some signs of life. So is it a concern that they're not getting those strong finishes? I suppose so, but yes. I don't know how much of a difference it makes unless it makes a difference in the European competition they're in. And I think I just think their season now boils down to the Champions League. I think it just does. And I don't think they can win it still realistically, but I do think that reaching a quarterfinal, reaching a semi-final would be a major achievement.
One final word on Lazio. I just don't think they score enough goals. I mean, this had been coming. We saw them take the lead against Bologna, but then Bologna blew them away in the second half. Against Torino, that was the most misleading scoreline you could ever see. Torino battered them in the first half, just couldn't score. It was a match between two teams that struggle for goals. Yes, they took the lead against Fiorentina, but that was a game where they allowed Fiorentina to hit the woodwork 4 or 5 times. So I think, you know, you can be misled a little bit by this, but I've never felt this season they've had the scope to go on and kill games off and score enough goals. And I remember last season there was 3 matches in a row where they scored, I think they won 4-0, including one of those games was against Milan. I think the other 2 were Fiorentina and Spezia, if my memory holds up. But I mean, they were really good last season at doing that. And obviously we've mentioned that Milinkovic-Savic is gone, but the injury to Zaccagni hasn't helped either. And he hasn't been contributing anywhere near enough goals compared with last season anyway. So I think that's the problem. If you take a lead in a match, you're reliant on keeping clean sheets. They've done that plenty of times this season. We've seen them, you know, with those narrow 1-0 wins. We saw it in the derby, in the cup, etc. But there's only so long that can hold up, as we've seen with Juventus.
Speaking of Juventus,
cheeky segue.
It's a cheeky segue indeed. They, of course, lost to Napoli. Once again, they traveled to the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona and end up losing. It wasn't the humiliation that it was last season. It was a 2-1 victory for Napoli. Let's leave them aside and discuss whether or not under Calzone you would say that Napoli is well and truly back. I mean, they hammered Sassuolo. It's not hard to do that these days against Sassuolo. Apparently, they only showed up if it's Inter and Juventus back in the day. But they hammered Sassuolo. They came into this match. We're once again seeing the glory of Kvaratskhelia and Victor Osimhen. It must be nice to have your star striker back, who had only made 10 appearances prior to Calzone sitting on the bench. Is this a Napoli side we can start to get on board with? Is this a Napoli side that we'll now see collecting points? Patrick, you seem to be so like, I don't believe this team whatsoever.
I would have said yes until I saw the manner in which they beat Juventus. I honestly, it was the weirdest game. We've been sort of lamenting the fact that Juventus win games ugly and they never look like creating lots of chances. I know you're a devotee of expected goals as well, Mina. I don't know what their expected goals were here, but it felt like they should have been 3-0 up at half time at least. It was higher. Or 3-1. But, you know, even then in the second half, there were big chances for Cambiaso. Vlahovic had another shot. Alcaraz, had he not had a couple of terrible first touches, might have been in shooting positions. This was a really, there's Rugani at the end. I don't know how Napoli won this match. They won't care because this is what you need, a bit of momentum in getting wins. But you can look at it 2 ways. I think if you're being ultra positive and ultra optimistic, you will say Napoli are starting to take the game to their opponents. They are creating chances. Lobotka looks back to his best. Di Lorenzo looks back to his best. Kvaratskhelia and Osimhen look back to their best. 4 of their most important players, if not their 4 most important players last season, Kim notwithstanding, having obviously moved on, they're all looking in top form again. So you can take that positive, or you can actually look at the game itself and think this is a Juventus side that don't ordinarily create so many chances. And why were they allowed to create so many opportunities? Was it a very good creative night from Chiesa? Yes. Was Vlahovic unlucky? Yes. Both of those statements are true. But I think on any other night, then Juventus scored twice, if not 3 times, as opposed to once. And we're talking about Juventus's first win in Naples for 5 years in the league.
I think that the Sassuolo game is really hard to take anything from because Sassuolo are dreadful. I mean, they are really dreadful.
They really are.
Their pants.
Yeah, like sticking 6 past them is obviously something. But Sassuolo have won 1 game this calendar year. I think 1 game, in fact, going all the way back to November. They've won once, and out of all the other games they've played in those last 3 months, they've, I think, only even drawn 2 other ones. So they have lost a lot. Haven't always lost 6-1. And I think that for certain, that game helps. And I think maybe even that game carries through a bit to this game because what it does give you is that confidence again, right? Victor Osimhen comes back in. You've suddenly got some swagger up front. Him and Kvaratskhelia are both doing their thing. And so you're feeling that bit of confidence that perhaps then translates to Kvaratskhelia taking his chance very well in the first half. Perhaps that has done something. And I think that there were good things in this performance for Napoli. They did have 70% of the ball. They did do some interesting build-up play. I think that when you listen to what the players say as well, they talk about Calzona bringing that idea of wanting to hold the ball, to build play, to reestablish those ideals that were the ideals, at least, of the Spalletti team. Not necessarily exactly the same as the Spalletti team, but the same, some core principles coming back that are different perhaps to what they were doing by the end under Volta Mazzarri, when it was back three and just try to be a Mazzarri team. Did they deserve to win this game? I mean, Patrick's already said it. Juventus could have scored easily 4 or 5 goals in this game. But that's football. You don't always get what you think you deserve if you don't stick the ball in the net.
You see, this is why people should come to this podcast for this quality. Let me just read to you what Luigi Garlando is one of my favorite writers.
He's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, Patrick, I don't know if I do at this occasion. This is one thing. You can worry about Juventus because Napoli has confirmed what the bianconeri lack compared to the competition, their game. He talks incessantly about how the inexplicable passivity with the quality of the squad, how Juventus just couldn't manage any possession because, of course, like you mentioned, Nicky, he seems to be rating Napoli on the fact that they had 70% possession and yet managed to dig in the hammer when he talked about Mazzarri only caring about possession. So what is it? Because you can have all the possession in the world. Yeah. At the end of the day, Juventus created the chances that they didn't take. So
I want to start with Luigi Garlando because he's a great writer. Oh. He really is a great writer.
He is a great writer. But I would say on this occasion, the way that he has spoken about Juventus seemed a little bit fair when we, in great respect to what I saw on the pitch, because Juventus may never be a team that will possess the ball very often, and that shouldn't be a priority because we've seen what happens when Mazzarri's Napoli possess the ball often. But I thought for once, I mean, when I looked at that match against Frosinone, you could totally hammer Juventus. They were very lucky to have scored that last minute goal from Rugani to make it a win. And I totally understand if you want to be critical of a side that barely won against a team that's never managed an away win. But I also think it's somewhat a little bit harsh on Juventus to talk about Allegri not being able to get much out of the squad when, like you both agreed, they nearly could have scored 5 goals if they had, let's say, I don't know, Higuain up top, rather than this version of Vlahovic. Vlahovic has been tremendous.
I had to go to Higuain in Naples.
I did have to go to
Higuain.
I did. I mean, listen, Vlahovic has been really, really brilliant. So I don't want to, and I love the fact that he came out afterwards and says, I take full responsibility. If I want to be the player that I think I can be, then I need to score those goals. And I think that's fair to say. It was a beautiful goal from Federico Chiesa. But I think that of all the times to really go hard on Juve, I just disagree that this was the time. So I was
I would put it into context of what Garlando said on the eve of the match, which was he was basically stressing the point. He was making the case for the fact that Napoli immediately seemed to have more of a game plan and more of an identity under Calzona in his 3rd league match in charge than Juventus do in their 3rd season of Allegri. So that was the premise of his piece on the eve of the game. So I think naturally we all want to be proven right. And so he then decided that he was going to take the result as a way of proving his thesis from the day before. But I tend to agree with you. It seemed the worst possible time to say Juventus are no good. Juventus don't have a game plan. I mean, they had a very good strategy, which nearly worked. It should have worked had the players taken their chances. But I think his point was more, Allegri has been back in the job 3 years, and unlike the best modern coaches around, he hasn't been able to give this team an identity. So I think he was beating that drum as opposed to assessing. He was assessing their performance not on the micro scale of that one single match, but on the macro sample of the last 2.5 seasons, I think.
You see, I agree with you there, because that point that you made now about we should be seeing more of an identity is one that needs to be mentioned. But I also think that he needs to have clarified that, because he ended it with saying we need to work more on the rule. Whoever plays better wins. And I don't think that it seems like he was hammering his own point rather than actually watching what was transpiring on the pitch, especially in light of the fact that there wasn't Rabiot, there wasn't McKennie, there were different starters available to them, and Gonge came on and gave away the penalty, and this is Nonge came on and gave away the penalty. At the end of the day, this is a somewhat inexperienced squad. I think these things you can expect to happen. And yet I will still say that for me, this should have been a clear victory for Juventus. Anyway, I don't want it to look like I'm a Juventus fan in this. I
think it was the way that's written misunderstands the way Juventus are playing. Juventus were, and we've seen plenty of coaches deploy this effectively. They were not playing for possession. They were playing for quick strike. They were playing
that's their game plan.
Quite intelligently, I thought, attacking that Persona build-up play and looking to punish it quickly. And I think in particular, the first Vlahovic chance, which is just purely, I think what Chiesa takes one touch before putting that ball into him was a perfect example of it. It's just as soon as we get the ball, go for the jugular. That's what it was. And it could have worked. And then I agree with you. I think Vlahovic took his responsibility well, said Juventus should be able to count on their striker to score those chances, and that's who I'm supposed to be. So he took ownership of that. Really strong game from Federico Chiesa, by the way, who we've not exactly been singing his praises here. But it was interesting team selection, I thought, from Allegri all around. I think that Juventus are at a slightly odd moment in their season, whereas Napoli do need to win games to try to get back into that top 4 or 5 conversation. Juventus, despite dropping some points recently, still look pretty locked in for a top 4 spot. And so now the question is, what is your target in the remaining part of the season? Obviously win the Coppa Italia. We've talked about that. They've got a very favourable situation there to win the cup. I think Vlahovic was interesting when he was asked, is it just getting in the top 4? And he said, no, second. It has to be second place. But seeing Iling Jr. get the start, seeing Carlos Alcaraz get the start, which of course is going to confuse everyone because there's already a Carlos Alcaraz who's quite good at tennis, not the same person. But yeah, a clear sort of signal, I read it as, that part of the end of this season, especially with talk ongoing in the media about whether Allegri still not having signed a contract extension could mean that this could be the end there. But I think it feels like this is an attempt to set the stall out of what we're trying to do in the end of this season, is to take a look at all the young talent we have some more. Although, yes, poor Nonge coming on and lasting just long enough to give away a penalty and then getting hauled off again in the 90th minute did feel a little bit brutal.
Head to SerieAchronicles.com/Patreon now and subscribe to the Chronicles Tifosi Patreon membership with a free 7-day trial. Get early access to every full-length episode and voice note before the rest of the world. Plus, all episodes are 100% ad-free. And you get bonus Patreon-only exclusive episodes, video episodes, and behind-the-scenes extras. Also, be sure to join the new chat community in the Patreon app and chat with fellow subscribers.
Just some quick shout-outs. Welcome to Giovanni Giuliani, to Wayne Moore, and Massimo Di Marco. Welcome to Serie A Chronicles. We hope you enjoy what we have to say.
Absolutely. That was wonderfully negotiated there, Mina, with the remaining fixtures in Serie A. Cagliari's first away win, lest we forget. So now actually Lecce and Frosinone are the only 2 teams that haven't won away this season. So there you have it. But that does bring us to a close for another episode of Serie A Chronicles. We will be back, as we always are, with extra bonus content later on this week, speaking to Phil Kitramilidis, as we mentioned earlier, on about all things Barcelona, Napoli and Atletico Madrid against Inter. But for now, I remind you, you can find us on all the socials. All of the links are in the show notes. And remember to help us reach 1,000 YouTube subscribers. We are so close. And Serie A Chronicles are not the only ones that are so close to 1,000 YouTube subscribers. Just putting that out there as a little hint. But for now, that's all from me, Patrick Kendrick, Mina Rizuki, and Nicky Bandini, and of course, producer Simon. We will see you all very soon. Goodbye.
Become a member at patreon.com/Serie A Chronicles for regular bonus episodes and content.
Sports Social Podcast Network.